That's a dramatised version of that story. There's a little bit of license there for additions, but it gives you the idea. It gives you the idea that this story happened. It's in the Bible. It's told by Jesus' disciples. And I want to use that as well. I want to tell you 3 stories this morning of different people engaged with water in different ways. And so we're dealing today with giving up superiority. Jesus, in that situation, was far superior to that lady. But he came from heaven to earth to be among us, to bring life through that water that he talked to her about, that living water. But first I want to ask you a question. If you lived in the 17th century, how would you have shown people you were superior? Any ideas? How would you show people you were better than them? You were richer than them? More important than them? Any ideas?
Dress.
Say again.
By my dress.
By your dress?
Yeah.
Build yourself a big house.
Big house? Servants?
Get
What
waited on.
Say again, mate.
Get waited on.
Get waited on by the servants, yeah. What about pineapples?
Possibly, because they would have to be grown in a greenhouse.
Going back to Christopher Columbus, was they believe the first person to bring pineapples to this country. And they were so special, obviously only last for a certain length of time, that if you had a pineapple, you were special. People would have parties, people would have gatherings, and on the banquet table would be all the food, and in the middle there'd be a pile of fruit, and on the top would be perched a pineapple. They would sell then to the equivalent of today's money of £5,000 for one pineapple. And they say people used to buy a pineapple and then sell it on, or share it with their family or colleagues, not to eat, but to present. So it's the equivalent of us maybe having a fancy car or a big house, or being covered in gold jewellery or a fancy dress. They had a pineapple because pineapple showed superiority. When they started to be made in this country, we've been to a few National Trust places, you see the pits where they grew the pineapples. The whole process was so costly to grow one in this country because of our weather, that actually the pineapple became the ultimate status symbol. If you had a pineapple, you were the Kardashians of that time. But what about this? What about water? Does that make us superior? It's something I think probably all of us have got a tap at home, and we can just pour it as much away of it as we want. It still amazes me that many of us go and buy it when we can actually get it out of a tap that we pay for. But actually water brings superiority in so many different ways. And I want to give you 3 different versions of that. The girl was thirsty and the water was right in front of her. So she walked up to the water fountain, stood on her tiptoes and started to take a drink. It would have been a normal, everyday occurrence, apart from the sign that read, "Whites only." No sooner had the water crossed her lips than the young girl, Olive, felt somebody grab her shoulder. It was her father, the great African-American scholar, philosopher and theologian, Howard Thurman. He and his wife had taken their 2 daughters on a vacation from their home in Washington on a trip throughout the southern United States. Now Dr. Thurman was experiencing the pain of explaining to his daughters, just as his parents had explained to him, that in the South, in the 1930s, young black girls couldn't just disregard the signs. Not at the drinking fountain or bathroom, not at the swimming pool, not at the rest stop playground where the swing set was waiting for them to play. Not unless you were white. Thurman told the story throughout his life and described each time with heartbreak that he felt in the moment that his thirsty little girl, forming tears in her eyes, realised that something was different. He cried along with her and her sister at the tragedy of having to be the one to teach them the way of the world at that time. seeing the moment when his daughter first realised and saw that something was different. Now that might be history to us now, but the reality is there's still the have and the have not. The somebody against the nobody, the superior against the inferior, the inside the circle against the outside. Those who can drink from the fountain and those who can't. Maybe you've been a person who feels limited or restricted. Maybe you've been kept from the water in some way. Or maybe in the times of your life, you've been the one keeping others away. Throughout human history, it's been a story that's gone time after time after time, not always with water, with other things. But actually we live in a world where there's the have and the have-nots. We talk about the north-south divide, don't we? And we talk about the poverty gap, and we talk about so many things about two separate worlds. But for that family, it was, I can't drink from the well because I'm the wrong colour. I was brought up in the wrong part of America. In the story we've just heard on the video, one sign reads Samaria. And the Gospel of John says that Jesus had to go to Samaria. He was on his way back from Judea, back to Galilee, and there was two ways to go. Most people would have taken the left and followed the River Jordan. It was a downhill, steady path, and it was pretty easy to go until you reached Jerusalem. Or you could go right, as some others did, walking along the coastline of the sea, on a scenic route, but it was hill country, it was hard work, it was not the way to go. But Jesus said he had to go to Samaria. Jesus clearly wanted to go to that way, to that place, I believe, to meet that woman at that well. He stops at the village, he finds his way to the well, to the water, where most Jews would have seen the sign that it was marked for Samaritans only. Probably not a physical marker, but a marker left by the history of that area. Samaritans and Jews shared tension and hatred. For more than 700 years, they had regarded each other as religiously, racially and socially inferior, and that they were superior, both sides thinking the same. The disciples go off to go and get food and leave Jesus at the well without really questioning what he was doing. He meets the woman and asks for water. She clearly recognises that he was different to her and that he shouldn't be there. But you get the impression, even though we don't know her name, Jesus knew her. Jesus recognised her and recognised what she needed. We know that she was there to fill water in the middle of the day because she wasn't even welcome within her own. But Jesus sees something different. We come to recognise that she is isolated, lonely, on the outside of the circle. But actually this well, as we know, is not just a source of water, it's a source of a meeting place, a people where the women would have come together to meet, to chat, to share stories, to share, how's your day going? But that would have been at the beginning of the day. She's there on her own because she's not welcome. She's inferior. She's there in the heat of the day. Not in community, not belonging, not in relationship. But to Jesus, she was important. She recognises the inferiority of her own. Why would you, a Jew, ask me for a drink? A woman of Samaria. She just doesn't even rate herself. But Jesus sees something different. And he explains something through the story. He explains something through the story that I know you. I know your history. I know your story. I know about the men in your life. And how many of us judge the woman? We don't know the story really, do we? We know she had 5 husbands, but we don't know why she had 5 husbands. We don't know her backstory. And so many of us, I know I've been guilty of reading that story and making presumptions about the woman. But actually what's important is Jesus sees something different. Jesus wants to give her opportunity for water to make a massive difference in her life. How many of us judge people when we look from the outside. We don't really know their story. I know many times I've heard in food bank, when we've been given a food bank parcel, somebody will say, did you see their car? Did you see that outfit they were wearing? It cost this much money. But we don't know their story, do we? I was one of the first Christmases I was here to do the Giving Tree with Helen before Sarah was here. We met a lady who actually qualified for the Giving Tree but lived in one of the most affluent areas in Coventry. And people went, how did that happen? How did we give her toys? But then when we heard her story, she actually was struggling just as much as other people in the area. So we just don't know. But Jesus does. And we see as the story goes on, at the point we stopped because it was going to go on even further, we recognise that she recognises Jesus as the Messiah, as the one that would come and change everything, the living water that would refresh her soul and give her everything that she needed. And what happens next? She goes and tells people. He told me everything I've ever done. She goes off and meets with the people that normally she would avoid and wants to tell them about the living water of Jesus. Jesus can change everything. The third story about water is about a friend of mine. And it goes to South Africa in 1994, on the day that black people for the first time had an opportunity to vote in elections. A life-transforming moment. My friend lived in Johannesburg. Now in history we look back and see that 17 million black South Africans voted for the first time. An amazing day. My friend is white, lived in Johannesburg, and sat in his house on that day and watched queues form from early in the morning before the sun rose. And they get longer and longer and longer as more and more people joined the queues and fed through the polling stations. But he saw people starting to flag. He saw people starting to struggle, people giving up, people would leave the queue. And he became distraught. He realised actually this moment in history, people weren't able to do something to change their lives. So he did something as a white South African that it would have been easy not to do. He decided to do something. He got surrounded his neighbour next door. They got their dining tables out of their house and put them in the garden and just kept filling up cups and cups of water to give that water to the people so that they could change their lives forever. And as we see now in history, it did change South Africa in a way that they could never imagine. And so water is far superior, in my opinion, to pineapple. Pineapple's lovely. It even now comes in a tin, you don't have to do anything with it. But actually water changes. It can change in negative ways, like the story we heard at the beginning, where you're not welcome. It can change in positive ways, like my friend in South Africa. Or it can change in the best way ever. It can change your world forever when you accept the living water of Jesus Christ. He offers that opportunity, doesn't he? He says, come and see. That's what the lady shouts to her friend, the people that she met in her village. Come and see. The Messiah, he's here. He changed everything for me. He can do the same for you. And I just want to encourage you that actually, if you feel inferior, God promised in that song we heard earlier, that you are enough. God will be in you if you accept him. And you just need to take a drink. So I encourage you that actually if you feel superior this morning, there's only one that can claim that, and he doesn't. But if you feel inferior this morning, take a drink. Drink the living waters of Jesus, because he'll change everything. Amen.